The winter of 1944 was so cold that rivers froze. Yet in the months that followed, as the Allies advanced on Germany, 250,000 people, mostly Jews, were evacuated from concentration camps in their path. Some were moved in open coal wagons or closed cattle trucks, but most were marched on foot along roads and across country. Only the strongest survived. Among them was Kitty Felix, aged 17, but already a veteran of Auschwitz death camp. From Bielsko in Poland, where she came from a prosperous Jewish family, Kitty survived nearly 2 years in Auschwitz, where on a daily basis she witnessed thousands of Jews being sent to the gas chambers. Abused, beaten and starving, she was forced to sort through the mounds of belongings stolen from victims. For her and other survivors of Hitler's concentration camps, the death march was just one more indignity. Now Kitty Hart Moxon, and living in Birmingham, and one of a decreasing number of eyewitnesses, Kitty has been back to Auschwitz several times. But the story of the death marches has never fully been told. So when her friend Stephen Smith, the director of Britain's Holocaust Centre, heard that she planned to retrace her steps, he offered to go with her and document that journey. Now, 57 years on, she's come back to Poland to recreate the 1,000-mile journey which took her back and forth across Europe. It began at Auschwitz in November 1944. Kitty and 100 other women, including her mother, were picked out by a German industrialist for special war work. Loaded into cattle trucks, they headed northeast towards their first stop, the labour camp at Gross-Rosen.
So Kitty, what I want to really understand is, why is this trip important to you?
Because how can the historians put it together if the survivors cannot remember? They've got no documentation. If you come here, there's nothing. There's nothing, look at it. You're seeing green, and there wasn't green, it was snow. What can historians do here without the survivors? And when I went into Auschwitz, I had a picture of Auschwitz, of different things in Auschwitz. But when I went in there, I confirmed everything that I remembered was confirmed.
How does this compare at first glance to being at Birkenau, Kitty?
I'll tell you, it's dead primitive. It's
primitive?
It's dead primitive. It's nothing like the guardhouse in Birkenau. The Auschwitz hierarchy would never have done with this. They would have liked it a little better than that.
So what are we looking at here, do you think?
You're looking at the main Lagerstraße, and that's the Appellplatz.
Do you remember any of the features that we see here?
Well, I remember the Appellplatz, because I know it was very close to where we've came in, and I would say we were on somewhere down there, on this side, in a wooden shed. I wasn't here very long, don't forget. Each one of these is a place. So you've got about 70 sub-camps belonging to this camp, each one with a name. Now, I'm looking for more. That's it, Reichenbach. That's where I was. That's the factory where I work.
It's not Reichenbach today, is it?
No, it was called Dzierżonów, yes,
yeah,
but they've
sure.
changed all the names. Don't forget, this was Germany.
Sure.
So they all got German names. Breslau is Wrocław.
Yeah.
And there was a camp, I knew there was a camp outside Wrocław. And that's all made of granite. Granite's been quarried here, and this is this lovely granite that I would like in my garden.
Of 75,000 prisoners at Gross-Rosen in January 1945, a third were women.
What have we got here?
Okay, well, we're walking into a block. I tell you, that's sheer luxury.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have had a luxurious block like this in Auschwitz or Birkenau. First of all, look at the floor.
The concrete.
It's actually got concrete floor. We had just mud. The bunk beds are, yes, let's pick up one of these floods, because that's really interesting. Now you see, you had a board like this, you had these boards, and then there was a straw mattress. In Reichenbach, we had a block, it was a wooden block, but it had these kind of bunks. Now, in the center of this block was a heating channel. And you know how cold it is here now, right? Well, we were absolutely frozen. So what did we do? We burnt the boards. So every night we took somebody else's board to burn. Well, by the end of 3 months, there was one board here in my bed, and one board down there, and there was just a straw mattress in between. One night was an inspection. They came in, and I thought, that's funny, there's a warm in here. They touched this heating channel, and they wanted to know who made the fire, and nobody owned up. So there was an inspection. They guessed it had to be from the beds. So they took off the straw mattresses and found slats were missing. And absolute fury. So there was a roll call almost after that. And the punishment, I think we had no food for 24 hours. And then one person was picked out and the hair was shaved off. And that was my friend Henya. And her sister was terribly upset because she had lovely hair. And she said, not mine, my hair. You know, but they wouldn't have it. They had the haircut. But nobody was actually beaten up, but we were starved for 24 hours. What was so striking when we walked into this block, it was absolutely obvious what I've always said, that in a way, men were treated better than women.
In what ways?
Well, first of all, the facilities. You saw some lockers there. You saw chairs on the table. There was never anything like this for women. They wanted the women to die because they were afraid they might reproduce. Don't forget that.
For Kitty, Gross Rosen was merely a transit camp. For others, it was to be their grave. This nearby quarry was dug out in just 5 years. The high-quality granite earmarked for the reconstruction of Berlin, planned by Hitler's architect Albert Speer. Extermination through labor was the guiding principle. The destruction of camp records means there are no precise figures, but it's believed 40,000 people ended their lives here. After 2 days at Gross Rosen, Kitty and the Auschwitz group were moved 20 miles southeast by train. Their destination, Reichenbach, where the electronics company Telefunken had set up production for the Nazi war effort.
We were thrown out of a train here.
In some kind of siding?
Yes. I didn't see a station. Just a kind of siding.
And then what happened next? Where were you taken to?
We were taken across the fields into a camp.
There's a train line coming in, look there.
Yeah, that's right. Comes from Gross Rosen.
There's a station, perhaps. And
Yeah.
look, I mean, that's actually where they're marking.
Yeah, well,
the
across
camp.
the fields, across the
So
fields.
that would make sense,
That
wouldn't
follows.
it? Which I guess
That
would
follows.
be actually over that direction.
Well, go and find the way to the camp.
Okay, great. There's some buildings coming up on
The
the
building's coming out. It looks quite a large camp. Yeah. You see that? You see, there was barbed wire here, and it probably was electrified all the way. There you've got the things for the electrified.
Let's go and have a
thing.
look.
Okay. Yeah. We've come
So
along
we're-
here. We've come along here. That's right. There's just barbed wire, which is missing.
Should we
just
go and have a
now.
look?
Yeah, but what I'm looking at is I'm looking at this stone hut.
Wait, does it feel
It feels
camp-like?
Oh, it's a
to you?
camp. Oh, there's no doubt about that. That's a camp.
So
So,
we've got a low brick building here, look.
a low brick building. This is the size of a block that would house some 400 women, which is feasible. That's the possibility.
So was there a situation from time to time where you had a camp within a camp?
Well, it was like this in Birkenau.
Big, absolutely, yeah.
You had one big camp, it was fenced off.
Sure.
And
But
you
do
had no
do you
common.
remember that in this situation? Because obviously you were here for 2 months, weren't you?
Look, what I'm
Nearly 3
saying to
months.
you, yeah, what I'm saying to you is, you came here in the dark from the factory, and you left in the morning in the dark, so you saw nothing else. But the location is pretty well correct.
Okay.
The only my reservation is I can't see a wooden block.
Should we go and have a look inside these other ones? and see what
Yeah,
there
I
is?
think so.
Because-
See this pathway?
Yeah, yeah.
That would have been where the SS would have been walking,
Okay.
and they didn't like walking in the high mud, So it's feasible,
Let's
yes,
have a
they
look.
would have built this.
Let's have a look in here.
Let's have a look.
Animals.
Actually,
Mind you, there
this
is an
is-
upstairs, so you don't build housing for pigs on 2 stories, do you?
No.
You know, it reminds one of these sort of stables where you have, if you like, the animals kept downstairs and the cavalry living upstairs.
Ah,
isn't
no,
it?
wait a minute. That's...
Hey, look at this.
No, yes, that would you believe?
Skinheads, white
Yeah,
power,
the skinheads have arrived. Look at this.
Ku Klux Klan.
Absolutely. This was a block because they wouldn't come here to deface this like this if it was nothing else.
If it had nothing to do with the past, yeah.
That's it. So that's what it is. That's what it is.
Yeah.
That was a living block, wasn't it?
Interesting.
That's where men were in here.
So in other words, the local skinheads have,
The local
have
skinheads
come
have
here.
come here and said, that's where you've lived, and you
Right.
got shit on the wall.
The camp was indeed one of the 70 sub-camps of Gross Rosen, called Sportschule.
Yeah, this was a camp, okay?
Was it a farm since the war?
Tak, to widzieliśmy. After the war, they had pigsties, and this is why you're seeing the pig. That was post-war. The Poles took over after the war. They threw the Germans out. In came Poles from God knows where. Gdzie jest ten pomnik? Gdzie?
W lasku tam.
Tam w Lasku jest. Ah, there is a monument there.
Can you take us to show us?
Może się nam pokazać? Jak to idzie, jak nie chce pani iść, to... Co? O, nie ma buty. O, you come with us, he'll show us. Yeah. To jest pomnik, tak?
Aha.
I jak oni ludzi zabijali tutaj? O, tutaj też. A, w tym lasku. Oh, they would bring the people here into the woods, and that's where they would actually kill them off, not in the camp itself. And then they leave the bodies here. It's mostly Poles, I think. Oh, wait a minute, there's a Jewish plaque here. There's a Jewish plaque, it's in Hebrew.
Polska.
Hang on. Na miejsce tym, well, our brothers who died here.
And this is concentration camp Sportschule, look, yeah. So that's what we thought it was.
That's right, that's right. That's just the name, was the name of the camp. That's what they called it.
Around the camp here and on the walls, there is a
cross.
no, there's graffiti with sort of SS and skinheads. Who would write that?
A tam, wie pan, tam wewnątrz w tym obozie to są takie graffiti napisane, tak?
To tak, pisali już później.
Łebki
pisali.
To po wojnie, tak?
Tak, to już tak jak teraz przychodzili,
teraz.
pisali.
Now they come in and do that.
Who does?
I don't know.
The people from the locality?
To nie ludzie stąd, co?
Nie, stąd.
Nie, no, not from here. But they do come in and deface the interiors, yeah. I don't know what it means. Does it mean good job done?
Yeah. Interesting.
Possibly, that's right.
The women were marched 2 miles to and from work in the dark. But even darkness couldn't hide some landmarks on the way to the factory.
You're walking down a street like this. Did you recognise the houses?
Yes,
scenery here?
this type of houses, definitely this type of houses. And you find on the left-hand side, there came this wonderful smell, tantalizing smell of baking bread.
It was something like this, perhaps.
Yeah, something like that. That's it. Well,
Have
let's
a look
go
in the
in.
window.
Jeszcze raz. Z tyłu? Aha. At the back is the bakery.
Has there always been a bakery here?
Zawsze było, tak? Tak. During the war there was this bakery here. And they were baking bread here every day. 80. Nie wiem, co to jest.
To jest złotóweczka.
Dziękuję bardzo. Już dobrze, już dobrze. Nie, już dziękuję. She won't have the change.
From the bakery, Kitty remembers it was just a short distance to the place where she worked. In 1941, the Telefunken Company had taken over a former Jewish-owned weaving factory on the outskirts of town.
What are we looking for? We're looking for a
We're,
brick.
we're looking at a big brick building like
building.
that, not in the centre of the town, but somewhere not far from.
Big square brick building with chimney.
Yeah, with a chimney. That's it.
Yeah.
Let's have a look.
So we can pull into
Chimney.
this garage. or
Yeah,
whatever.
it is. You know, it is. Look, 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 look.
Oh, that's like it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's have a look. And there on the corner, look, Diora. Now
Diora, that's right.
They
Diora. They were
manufacturers of radios.
radios. That's right.
So maybe there's a link between that,
That
and
and
this building.
Telefunken. That's it. And that's right.
Look at that.
Oh,
That's it.
yeah,
The chimneys
that-
are missing, mind you.
Well, no, you've got these things. Look.
Oh yeah.
That looks very familiar. Look at this, Stephen. Because you said this isn't here, but come and look
Oh
at
yeah, look at that on the side there.
there.
That apex.
that apex. It's
So
the
the
front.
Tell me, do you actually recognise it?
Right. Vaguely, yes. Vaguely, it's got
Yeah.
to be that.
If we got inside, do you think you'd recognise the inside of it?
Well,
It looks like it's an office now, doesn't it?
yeah, it's an office now. There were big halls. If there's one big hall, I'll recognise the lavatories.
You recognise the lavatory?
Yeah.
Go on, let's have a look. Anybody in there?
Ah, good job. Well, I don't know. Yeah, that's it.
Is it?
Yeah. The SS supervisors would gather a whole large group of women. I don't know, but it was packed out here, packed out with women. Oh, I don't know, it might have been 50, something like that. And she said, lavatory, you know, now, so my mother would bring a container, hide it somewhere, don't ask me, just like a little, that's almost
tub
like
or
a
something.
baking sheet, but
Okay,
a little higher. And she said, what we're going to do is we're going to have a bath. And everybody would go and strip out, put the clothes down, and have a bath in those tubs. You know, wash your feet in the tubs, wash all around. I would wash my mother, she would wash me. No towels, and then to put on the clothes. And the SS woman, she'd stand outside. You know, she didn't know what was going on in here. And she kept screaming, schneller, schneller, raus, 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 you know, back to work, you know. And we were still wet. So I would sort of dress, because the next group had to come in. And of course, we had to queue to get into the loo, you know.
So we found the real thing.
So, yes, we did. Yes, we
Great.
did. Great.
Brilliant.
Great. Now look at this. Now this was a huge hall with all the machines were here.
Do you recognise it?
Well, it's a room like that. I didn't have
So-
this
so
on
large-
the floor.
large ceilings,
Large ceiling,
Probably
large
concrete floors.
concrete floors. What you had there, oh God, I can't explain this machinery to you. It had dials and like a desk. Above it, there were the kind of pipes, and there were blowing glass up above. Then two of us, that means a German woman and myself, were sitting at a kind of desk. Underneath this desk, you put in huge cylinders of, well, we think it was carbon dioxide or something like that. And I had to carry these very heavy cylinders for miles away, because there was another hole somewhere. You carried these cylinders, you carried them, and I had to place them underneath this contraption. And then the German woman, she wasn't allowed to speak to me, she was just showing me like this. And she was maneuvering these dials. And then they were blowing something up above it.
So you were making parts for radios, transmitters, or for possibly even
We think it was for aircraft.
aircraft?
Yeah, we think so. Nearly every day, this German woman, there was a desk, we were sitting at the desk, she used to bring a sandwich and hide it, you know, behind something else. And she'd point to me there, and she'd bring me a sandwich every day. That was the scientific side of the manufacture, whatever was being manufactured.
Was this whole
And
complex here?
I think so, yeah.
Can I ask you about working
Yeah.
conditions? Were you
Yeah.
fed while you were
No.
here? So you worked all day
No.
without being fed?
Yeah.
Were you kept warm?
Yes. Yeah, it
So-
was reasonably warm. I mean, warmer than we've been accustomed to. It was a reasonable temperature.
But generally speaking,
Mm.
you were working hard, but you were well looked after insofar as you were kept alive.
You wouldn't have survived here for very long on the food if it hadn't been for the German woman with one sandwich a day. You would have been hard pushed to survive.
Kitty worked for 3 months at Telefunken, a tiny cog in the Nazi military machine. The building still carries the logo of the Jewish Cohen brothers who used to weave cloth here. Then, on a day she'll never forget, it was her mother's 55th birthday, her world changed again.
So it was the 18th of February, and without any warning whatsoever, they burst into our hut, roll call, whistles blew, and just one word was said, and that was Marschbefehl,
Which means?
marching order. And before you knew where you were, you had to stand in fives. You know, before you knew where you were, we were out of the camp. My mother said, don't worry about being cold, being hot and being hungry. You look at scenery, because you've not seen scenery like this since you left home. And I looked to see this old church that must have been there.
Well,
So we must have gone that way and then round.
How far is it? It's about 3 or 4 kilometres there, isn't it? A bit more than that, perhaps even.
Oh, that I know.
It's deceptive, isn't it? Look how many pylons are on.
No.
1, 2, 3,
We're
4,
talking
5,
about
6, 7, 8.
100 kilometres to the next destination. Many of the women had wooden clogs, and that was just not feasible. Snow was so high, and there wasn't a pathway, so that wasn't feasible. Anyway, I came out of Auschwitz with a pair of shoes. Didn't fit me, but I had some shoes, so did my mother. I brought her some shoes from where I was working. In the 4 months that we walked to the camp, they started disintegrating. And probably the first day on this march, my shoes had gone totally. The sole just opened up and I was completely wet through. So the first thing I did is throw away my shoes. And my mother soon after that. But now what happened then is that you had all these thousands of people walking. They threw off the clothes.
It was minus what, 20 degrees or something
Oh,
like this?
yes. Yeah.
Why are people shedding clothes? Because surely when you
It
stop,
was
you
hot.
need
No,
it when you stop.
I know, but you didn't think of that, I'm afraid. You just literally couldn't carry it. Everything was heavy. You just, by the time you walked to the end of the day, you literally couldn't carry anything. Anyway, whatever it was, people started shedding. And things were lying, jumpers and things. So what did you do? You picked up a jumper and with the sleeves, you wrapped it around your feet. And that's how you walked. Most of the guards were at the rear. Got it? And as soon as people started lagging behind at the rear, that killed them off. All the time as you were walking, you heard shots everywhere. Well, we thought it's going to come a time they're going to run out of ammunition because they didn't have any reinforcements, ammunition.
You knew that, did you?
We thought, just how long are they going to shoot, There are so many of us. How long are they going to shoot before they run out? But what we didn't like is when we started to approach the mountains, because to us it meant they're going to execute us.
They were heading for the border between Poland and Czechoslovakia. In the way was the Owl mountain range, its peak over 1,000 meters high. They had no food, most of them were barefoot, and the snow was often up to their knees. Nor were they the only people on the move. One morning, the straggling column arrived at a plateau.
There were hundreds of people here, civilians, German civilians, and carts and horses, canvas hoods over these carts. Some people were getting up, having breakfast, and it took the Auschwitz group 10 seconds to weigh up the situation, because we'd been without food for, well, I couldn't tell you how long.
What did you do?
What did we do? We attacked. Attacked. Why? Because at the side of these carts, we saw sausages hanging, meat was hanging, buckets were hanging. And we thought, my God, that's it. We just went for it. There was incredible panic because they didn't expect it us, and they didn't want to be robbed of their food, which they were. So they harnessed their horses and started to gather the cows and started descending. And we ran after them. And you see the guards were saying, anstellen, anstellen, you know what that means? Get in line, and clobbering people everywhere with the rifle butts. But of course, they couldn't shoot because of all these civilians there. So I tell you, if it hadn't been tragedy, it was high comedy. And then I saw a big bucket. And I thought, oh, there's got to be food in there, isn't it? I pulled out this bucket And it was like a galvanized, and it was so heavy. I took this to my mother, and the girls were actually laughing, you know, because they said, a bucket of fat, what are we going to do with that? And my mother said, that's marvellous, it's absolutely jubilant, that's just what we need. We're going to put our feet in it, we're going to smear it on our feet. Oh, my mother said, it's good for your complexion. We smeared that one. And some people ate it, but we didn't eat it. Because
You're using it for protection against the
we
elements.
used it for protection. We put our hands in it because we didn't have any gloves, you know, and we didn't have anything on our feet. And it was marvellous because you dipped your feet in it and then wrapped your feet into, and it was nice and smooth. So we hung on to this bucket and we passed it down the line.
Can I ask you about your feelings
Yeah.
when you come back onto a place like this? What goes through your mind?
What goes through our mind that this came like manna from heaven. You know, somebody sent these people to us to save us, because no way would we have survived if these refugees hadn't been here and we hadn't got some food at that stage. I think that was just a godsend.
In ever-decreasing numbers, they came down from the mountains and closer to the Czech border. This whole region was crisscrossed by railways, but they had to walk and sleep in the open. But so did the guards, and when the opportunity arose, they too tried to find shelter from the brutal weather. Derelict buildings are now common in this once thriving industrial area, where one night, Kitty remembers the group of women arriving at a coal mine.
Now, what they couldn't do, they couldn't go themselves and leave us outside. So we're looking for something big where they shove everybody in.
Several hundred people in. Well, this is big
Well, I
enough.
think a few thousand.
Yeah.
So it could be that one group came in here. They might have gone all over here. There were more buildings here than
Does
this.
this remind you, though, of what you
It
were
does.
in?
Well, it was very much like that. Whether this was the particular hole, I wouldn't know. But it was very much like this, with the coal dust. We slept on the floor, and it was warm. It was fairly warm inside. I don't know where the heating came. Well, it appeared warm to us because we've been outside.
Outside, yeah. Sure.
That's right. But it had a roof like that, you know, quite huge, and it was packed. And we were very warm because we were absolutely packed out in here.
Into a space like
in
this.
a space
yeah,
like that.
sure. Does this look like the place to you?
It is very much so, Stephen. The whole landscape is very much to what I recall. But of course, what we didn't know at the time, which we've only discovered post-war, that this whole area here was a secret weapons industry,
yeah.
and the whole mountain range is full of bunkers.
Sure. Yeah.
And we walked right through.
Once you stayed here overnight, where did
Yes.
you move to then?
I think we moved onto the Czech side, crossing the frontier.
After a further week's forced march, the remnants of the column arrived at a women's camp at Trutnov in Czechoslovakia. But again, there was only a temporary respite, for within a day came the familiar order to move on.
And then they took us to a siding.
Something like this?
Something like this, with open coal trucks. Now these look a little on the big side, but nonetheless, pretty well, this is what they looked like. That's it. If you can open the door. Well, that's it. That's it. It's a little high, but it's a coal truck, and it's almost bigger than what I remember. Yeah,
it's certainly got
it's longer as well. Yes, coal. Yes,
Coal.
but it's a bit longer. Yeah, but don't forget, it's probably 200 women in here. The guard went in with a piece of chalk, marked out a territory, put on a blanket, and he said, "This is my territory. Everyone that steps over is going to get shot and out."
What was done? What was done with the corpses?
We didn't do anything. The guard came along and threw them off.
They were thrown over the edge.
Over the, yeah. So, you know, we kept away from him
So when you finally arrived, where did you arrive, Kitty?
in a place called Porta. That was the very first station we came to. We read up there, it said Porta. And that's where they threw us out. Now, in the meantime, I would say about half the people had died of starvation.
Though they didn't know it at the time, Kitty and her companions did have a final destination. For on February the 10th, 8 days before the start of her death march, Albert Speer, now Hitler's armament minister, had sent a secret telex to his friend Karl Hanke, the governor of South Poland. In it, Speer asked for the transfer of the Telefunken workforce. The reason? Their unique skills in the production of radio valves for jamming transmitters and equipment for high-performance aircraft. The destination? An underground factory built for the electronics giant Philips, whose entire production had been moved from Holland to Germany. The route of the Death March had taken Kitty's group past similar underground workings in the Polish mountains. Codenamed Giant, the complex was planned to link up 8 secret rocket and weapons factories by underground railway systems. None was finished by the end of the war, and only 2 are officially open today.
My gosh, look at the size of this cabin.
Why? Well, I think we need to go and have a look.
Narrow gauge railway, look.
You see those trolleys, they moved off the stone.
Just look how far back it goes.
It's absolutely gigantic, isn't it? I don't know if I can get up.
They obviously haven't finished it.
Look at that.
Second story, look.
Well, it's been dynamited, you see that big hole. That's a ventilation shaft, this is, look.
Yeah.
You know?
Well constructed, isn't it? Look at the concrete. I mean,
Yeah, it's
well,
like Porta, and ventilation shafts everywhere.
see what's in
Oh,
here.
that's a guardhouse, let's go and see
Let's
it. Dzień dobry. Aha. Pan wytłumaczy, to jest broń...
To jest
Co?
broń, tak, to jest
Tak,
broń
to
niemiecka
jest broń
II
już.
wojny światowej,
Tak.
wartownia Bunkier.
A, to wartownia.
What I want to know is how on earth did people live down here? How did they breathe?
Rurami do wentylacji.
You watch. When we left this place around the mountains and they transported us, we didn't know then we were going to work in a place like this. Now,
Does it ring bells
yeah,
with you?
but this does. You see, where we went, Porta, we don't know if we're going to get in there. It was all reinforced, much more finished. Concrete floor, concrete walls, huge, huge halls, but much, much deeper. We were going down 11 shafts. This is only part of the complex. You're seeing one tunnel. The whole of the mountain range was full of these caves, people working in there. 40,000 prisoners. But did you know, we walked over the top of all these caves and we didn't know. And we heard rumours, but you couldn't see anything. It was all underground.
And in just a short time exploring the underground complex, the weather outside had changed. February 1945 seemed a lot closer.
You see the savage weather, Stephen?
Yeah.
Well, that's how it was. Some days were like this, and we were walking just feet wrapped up in bits of rag, and we got wet through and absolutely frozen, wet. And that's how it was, sometimes at night.
When you see it cooling down like this, you have to ask yourself, how did
They
anybody
survived.
survive in these conditions?
I know. The snow was much, much deeper, but it was blowing like this, snowing like this, and this is why so many people died on the way. The first night was spent on the flat, on the frozen ground, in the snow. No, nobody said more than one word, you know. The guards would string runter. Well, bang, down you went. Straight down, like this. You can lie on
In
top
the
of
snow,
me.
wherever you
No, it
were?
doesn't matter, doesn't matter. And you lie on top of me, see? And you change over.
So what happens when you're down there? Do you just freeze to death on the snow?
No, strange enough you didn't, you know. The snow was dry. You could manage about half an hour. And then you'd have to change over and somebody else would lie down. You know, you're just an animal and nothing else, aren't you? And you got an instinct. So what do? One single animal could survive. So we were just like penguins. But then you had a lot of people that had never been to Auschwitz. They didn't realize that you do need collective help. And they just couldn't survive.
Let's get out of here, because we've been here for 2 hours, never mind 6 days. I'm frozen.
I'm hot. I'm hot.
The hellish journey from Czechoslovakia to Germany took nearly a week. The track was repeatedly damaged by air attack, and the survivors had to put up with more personal humiliations.
The worst thing was there was a mess on the floor of the truck because you couldn't relieve yourself. There was nothing. So very often, if we could, two people would hold you and you'd, try and take your clothes off and sit on the edge of the truck and let it go. This is what we wanted to do because the guard, every time there was a mess on the floor, the guard started lashing out, "You pigs making a mess on this truck. It stinks here. How do you think we're going to travel with all this mess on the ground?" So we tried very hard to relieve ourselves.
After 6 days and nearly 500 miles in an open coal truck, Kitty and her mother eventually arrived at Porto on the River Weser. Among the first things they saw before being marched off to their camp was the monument to a former Kaiser. The clouds which swirl round it today are caused by warm air seeping from abandoned wartime factories cut out of the hill beneath.
So we've come up to that tower on the hill and we're looking across toward the station, and we've got this sketch plan, look, which we dug out. It was done just after the war.
Whoa.
Now somewhere,
At the back there was the camp.
yeah. So what we're going to do, we're going to go down
And
up
find the camp.
up that main road, up that valley there, and we're going to see if we can find the camp tucked
Find the
behind
camp,
that
that's
hill.
right, and then find the pathway to the top of to the entrance. Okay, let's have a look.
So this is it, the town centre. So
Yeah, somewhere here, somewhere's a memorial here. Let's have a look. Oh, that's a memorial. What a miserable little thing. Is that all they could do? Shall we see what it says? Nicht wissen wollen ist die bedingungslose Kapitulation. In other words, if you don't want to know, you capitulate. Things are going to happen if you don't remember. Where are the women? These are all men. Well, maybe these are the women here. That's obviously a man.
Those are not so.
These are, well, there could be men and women, these, because you wouldn't know.
Sort of stretching up there.
The hand stretching out.
Do you feel this represents you and your
No,
experience?
no way. It says Zwangsverpflichtete, right? It talks about forced labor. It doesn't talk about slave labor whatsoever, does it? It talks about Germans who were forced to do some work as well. Obviously, German technicians who were forced to do this. It doesn't talk about slave labor, does it? It doesn't talk about the Jews. Das ist Hausberge, ja?
Ja.
Da war ein Frauenlager irgendwo, ein Frauenkonzentrationslager. Wissen Sie, wo das war?
Lohfeld.
Lufeld.
Lohfeld.
Wir sind hier.
Ja.
Lufeld.
Ja, Lohfeld. Das geht, wenn Sie hier die
Ja.
Straße rauffahren.
Die
nicht?
Straße rauf und
Hier
dann
die
links.
Kirche. Und dann links jetzt am Fernsehturm rauf.
It is only up the road here, only up the road, Now then, let's see what we can find. Let's see plenty of fields. There's nothing. Does it say anything? Am Mindener Weg, he goes on. Lohfeld, this is what he said. If you look at this field, there could be foundations of some of the blocks which I couldn't get rid of. I mean, just look, there's some lines.
I would say this looks a bit conspicuous.
Ja, also, guten Tag. Dürfen wir Sie was fragen? Ich war hier während des Krieges, ja?
Ach so.
Und da war ein Lager hier. Ja? Wissen Sie, wo das war?
Ganz genau auch nicht. Wir wohnen ja auch erst hier so knapp 5 Jahre um den Dreh.
Und Sie haben nicht
Ich denke, da ist
gewusst?
schon sehr viele. Ja, es war wohl hier, das hier war wohl mal ein Behelfsheim und da steht ja jetzt alles unter Naturschutz. Ne?
Ja, aber hier war das Lager. Das wissen Sie nicht.
Nein.
Also auf dem Berg ist die Fabrik. Das haben Sie auch nicht gewusst? Nein? Dann müssen Sie das lesen.
Ja, genau.
Yeah. She didn't, danke, she didn't know there was a factory there. I had to tell her, would you believe it? This was the way up to the top. It was just a dirt track. And it was wide because you had to walk 5 abreast and then on 6 actually, because the guards, the women guards were walking at the side. All of a sudden we come to a clearing and that looks like it, very much like that. And then suddenly there was a hole in this mountainside. almost like a square hole. Not all that big, not all that conspicuous, but an obvious entrance into somewhere.
There's an air
And
vent,
look, it's
There's an air
been
vent.
there. I bet that's it.
Der kleinere Eingang, das
Der
war
kleine.
mein Fahrstuhl, das war hier
Aha.
vorne das große Rohr.
Aha,
Der
das war
näch-
der Eingang.
Das war ein Eingang.
Ein Eingang.
Ein Eingang.
Aha.
Bis ungefähr 100 Meter in die Richtung. Da war ein großer Eingang, wo man noch mit LKWs vorfahren konnte.
Ja.
Der ist jetzt zubetoniert.
Aha, aber kann man das noch sehen? Das
Man könnte es noch sehen, da ist noch eine Mulde im Berg
Aha.
drin.
Und wo dieses Rohr ist, also das war offen, ja?
Das war mal offen.
Waren Sie drinnen einmal?
Ich war auch schon öfter drin.
He's
Und-
been inside.
Und ein noch größerer Eingang, der ist jetzt noch sehr deutlich zu sehen. Und zwar, wenn man hier die Straße unten am Bahnhof vorbeifährt.
Das ist unten.
Auf der rechten Seite, ja. Und an der Hauptstraße 482, dann auf der rechten Seite, da sind jetzt einfach nur Steine vorgestellt.
Ja.
Man kann also noch sehr deutlich sehen, dass da ein sehr großer Eingang war.
Aber
What did he see inside there when he went in?
wir wollen wissen, was Sie dort gesehen haben, wie Sie drinnen waren.
Im oberen Bereich ist fast alles gesprengt. Man muss dort also sehr viel klettern. Sehr viele Schutthaufen, die dort zu sehen sind. Und da hat der Sprengmeister in den Jahren nach den Sprengungen auch Champignons angebaut.
Just 20 years ago you could still go in.
Danke
Now
vielmals.
you can't.
Danke.
Danke. Das haben Sie uns gut erklärt. Gut.
A sketch made by the British in 1945 shows a double entrance into the Philips factory. Looking at the same place today makes it clear that the tunnels at the top of the Porter Escarpment are now irretrievably closed. The secrets of what went on here are getting even more difficult to find. Nature is reclaiming the area, and the local authority at Porta Westfalica has little interest in opening the tunnels, even for historical reasons.
To be honest, it's a bit disappointing we can't get in there, because having made this journey so far, to find out that, it's blocked up and that the entrances that there are.
Well, we've been inside all the tunnels in Poland,
How would they compare to
and
what's
I would
under here?
say it's pretty much the same. You know, there were one or two tunnels where we actually saw concreted walls, yes, and rooms, halls. Well, that's how I recall it here in a way.
Tell you what, I've got something here you've not seen
Let's have a
before.
look. What have you got?
You haven't seen this before.
Let's
That you
have a
might
look.
find interesting.
Yeah, I haven't seen it.
These were images that were taken by a British officer.
Well, I tell you that the hall that I was in didn't have this machinery, but it had kind of tables. Now that's more like it, that kind of
The
tables.
flat tables with concrete floor.
Flat table and concrete floors. That's very much like it.
Another document that we dug up as well might be interesting to you. You know how you described
That's right.
there
11
were
shafts down or
11 shafts. Well, they were
Yeah.
precisely
Uh-huh.
11 shafts.
That's right. I knew it was 11 shafts. I tell you why. I think there were some numbers someplace as you went down on a platform, wasn't it?
If you look on
Were there
this
some
one, look,
numbers?
if you look on here, look, that says number 4.
Oh, there you are. That's it. Now,
So
as you went
that's
down,
going to be this
that's
floor
right.
here.
That's right. Now, as you went down, it was
Inches.
5, 6, 7, 8, 9. You came to 11s.
Just describe for me
Yeah.
what it was like to go down there in the morning and
Well, you were very tired when you got to the entrance because you'd walk this pathway here, up and down, barefoot on a rough ground. When I got there, you were really very tired. And then suddenly, say the first day we didn't know what it was. We thought they were going to gas us inside this bunker. And then we realized they only took a few people at a time. And there was a flat thing like you see here. I think there were 4 ropes, something like that. And the thing started to descend. And as you descended, you saw these numbers. And you came to this number 11, and there was a small room. We were led into this room, sat at a table, and it took about 10 minutes to teach you what you had to do, because it was something connecting small wires to something else, what they wouldn't know. And sometimes you had to work with pincers to do it. And the problem was here, you can imagine, there wasn't enough air.
But there are some people who want the story told, and local historian Jochen Bergman has written a book about Porter's underground war.
What did they do in here?
You made here oil.
Yes,
The oil
that was a
refinery.
refinery, yes.
And here on the right side there was
Yeah.
an elevator until
Yes.
top, and
Yes.
there the big machines was transported
They transported,
transported to the
yeah,
entrance from the top,
the machinery.
the machines.
The
So
machine-
directly up here was the route to the Philips factory.
Here, yes, here
Yes.
on the right.
What was the relationship between this factory and the one up above, which Kitty worked in?
Two different factories. The factory here makes oil,
Yeah.
and the factories on the top makes electronic.
So what
things.
did they call this here?
It's called DAX 1.
Dax 1. During the war it was called Dax 1.
The name of the underground was animal names.
Like what?
Dax is an animal.
Oh, I see.
Dax is,
yeah.
is like an animal, like a dog in that.
Oh,
It's a badger.
It's a badger.
And the
Yeah.
underground on the top, it named Stör 1. This is a fish name.
And they've got bats in there. Fledermäuse.
Richtig, right?
Ja, die gehen da rein.
You're living in it.
They're living in it. They know this. Why? They see them going, come in and out? All right.
What's this, 1944? 20th
The old.
yeah, inscriptions.
The oil refinery extended for 500 metres underneath the hill and was directly connected to the nearby railway system. Bergman has been inside the tunnels many times and has spent days exploring and mapping the underground factories. His research has exposed a vast network of subterranean caverns and shattered concrete halls, many not revealed on official plans. Other photographs show abandoned machinery and evidence that the tunnels were being used long after the facilities had been officially closed down.
Here was the entrance in the wall.
So is this the entrance that we saw yesterday on the
That
hillside?
is a big entrance. That is closed. There is an old car in it. The people pushed it into the hill, and then it was closed. Absolutely closed. There is no way to go in.
Why is it all closed up today? Why can't we go and see it?
The factories who have worked there are not interested that the name of the factory, like Philips, is not to make public that they have worked there with prisoners. It's not Philips alone. It is,
What are they afraid of?
the prisoners are not handled by care, I can say so. That they are handled. The lives of the prisoners are not. When they are lost, they are phoned for a new one. They take them like a tool.
Use them, abuse them. If they die, they die. They find some new ones.
To take a new tool.
At the beginning of April 1945, Kitty and her mother were once again on the move. The camp was evacuated and the women forced into trains to be sent back to the east. The Allies weren't far behind them, for on the 3rd of April, American tanks reached the River Weser. Kitty and her Auschwitz group, now down to 50 after for no reason they've been split up, were taken the 100 miles to Belsen concentration camp. Here conditions were so chaotic that there was no room for them, so they were sent back to the train.
What actually happened is a lot of trains were standing outside Belsen, and they forced us onto the siding, and a lot of muffled sounds came from the trains, obviously people crying for help. We suddenly realized that we're going to be in the same position, we're going to get loaded, and of course under armed guard we were actually pushed into a truck, and it was complete total darkness and no ventilation at all. That's the first thing that came apparent. Almost immediately people started gasping for breath, and there was like a panic inside, and everybody scrambling to the side of the truck, and then water running on the side of the tracks, that condensation. And I got hold of my mother and I said, I'm just going to get to the floor. Got to the floor of the truck, and lo and behold, there were some gaps, and I had a knife on me, and so I scraped furiously, and lo and behold, I enlarged the gap. And so I grabbed my mother, got her down, and she started breathing, and then I started breathing. We took breaths, in turns. Anyway, people started fainting and going unconscious and fighting one another, screaming, and then it became very quiet. There was a gravel path or something, obviously, and you could hear footsteps. And as these footsteps came closer, we started shouting, "Aufmachen, aufmachen, schnell, schnell aufmachen," you know, crying out for air. And then suddenly, this truck opened and there was just a panic. Everybody just threw themselves onto this open space and we fell out.
Here.
Here, just here, just as you see it here. It was just like that. Out we fell onto 3 men. Anyway, somebody said, "We're not going back into there, you might as well, you know, shoot us now. But we're not going back into these trucks, into this truck." So my mother, the best German, said, "We demand to be taken into a concentration camp." And so just a small group of people, he walked us off. That's how I came to Salzwedel.
Not for the first time, Kitty and her mother had cheated death. The other concentration camp prisoners on the train weren't so fortunate and died here at Salzwedel, just a month before the end of the war.
So really what we're looking at here is a mass grave.
Yes, we're coming
in
up to
memory
the
of-
mass grave, and this is where the bodies were found after liberation, and the local population, I believe, had to bury.
The local
Oh,
population
Yeah,
buried
that
them.
I think so, yes. About 244 people were brought out of one train. Whether it was my train, I don't know. We walked across fields and came upon this little camp here.
Well, this looks like it could have been.
Yes, that's one of the remnants of the barracks, because as you know, post-liberation, about the first things that happened, the camp was burnt down.
Do you
And
remember
what
how
we
many
did-
people were in the barracks?
We were just pushed into one of the barracks, and we couldn't communicate with these people because we're Hungarians. But the very first thing that struck us, that they looked in pretty good condition, and we thought, my God, there's got to be some food here. Yeah. And we had a fight and threw them off the beds.
Between the inmates?
Yes, the inmates. And threw some of these girls off the beds and found that they were hoarding sugar. And then we realized this is what they were living on. They were living on this hoard of sugar that they'd collected.
Where had they got the sugar from?
Well, there was a refinery, sugar refinery, down the road somewhere. And that's where some of the French prisoners of war were working. And they, somehow or other, supplied the prisoners with some of the sugar.
Tell me how the liberation happened. Then.
Yeah, I must tell you what happened. Yes, well, we were in here, and about 2 days before liberation, bullets were flying all over because we realized the front was very close. You could hear the artillery. And
There was
you could
fighting
hear,
in the vicinity.
Very close, that's right. And by that time, I couldn't walk anymore, and my mother was just lying in a corner. You know, she couldn't stand up at all. And I was sitting near a fence, and I don't know which side. It must have been down this end there. And across the fence, I could see stores, SS stores, with loads and loads of shelves full of bread.
Just outside the camp?
Us outside the electrified fence. And I was just sitting there mesmerized. You know, I was sitting for hours and hours just looking at this bread. And somebody sort of shook me by the shoulder and said, "Look, there's a military convoy there. It's tanks." And there were screams and shouts, "Help, help, help." And then one tank just swiveled round and just smashed through the gate. And that was the point of liberation.
So what happened to all the guards at that time? Were they all still there?
One SS, we don't know who it was, came in uniform, but we immediately realized he wasn't armed. So some 50 of us just attacked this man and ripped his uniform to bits. Completely, we just stripped him off, you know. We were going to beat him up or something, but we ripped all his clothes off. And as we ripped his clothes off, he had like a knife here, a dagger. And I sort of went like this and got this dagger, and that's how I actually got this dagger that I then went into town with, of the intention of killing. I came into a house, and I went down into the basement, and it's like semi-darkness. And in a corner was a group of people, and 1 or 2 children there. And there's a group of people behind me, and I had this knife, you see, and I was going there with this knife, and I saw this group of people. And then there was a child there and started crying. And, you know, it came to me just in the flash of a second, I can't kill a child. I can't go and kill anyone. If I kill someone, then the SS had succeeded, and making me like them. And I realized then that I must not do that. And in fact, what I did is I took this knife and I threw it the other way, and I must have thrown it with such a force, it just stuck in the door, you know? And the next thing happened, somebody came up to me from this group and started kissing me and shaking my hands and thanking me, you know, and crying.
So it seems to be that this street with the camp behind us and the factory in front of us,
That's
where
right.
everything was happening, really.
The women going to work along here turned left into the factory. This, by the way, is the commandant's house. It was given to him. That's right.
So this is his kind of villa in the middle of it all, where
That's right. He was very close by, close to the factory, close to the camp. To give him his due, he didn't blow the camp up, and he had order to do so.
And then this was the way into town, was it?
That's the way into town, straight in. We all poured into town here, streamed into town at point of liberation.
And one of the first buildings they came upon was a bakery.
Oh my, look at this. See this cake? This is
The Salzwedel speciality, Baumkuchen, or tree cake, is still made here. During the war, this shop was owned by a German who baked black bread for the army. His daughter remembers the arrival of American tanks and the subsequent chaos which followed the liberation of the various prison camps in town.
In der Stadt, also da sind die großen Geschäfte, vor allem die großen Geschäfte, die sind geplündert worden. Die Amerikaner haben 2 Tage lang die Stadt freigegeben zur Plünderung. Nachher war es vorbei.
People helped themselves. People were actually stealing and plundering, looting. Yes. We just went on a rampage of destruction. That's all we wanted to do, is to destroy. We didn't want to plunder. We were not interested in anything at all other than food. I mean, I didn't have any shoes, but I didn't even bother to look for shoes for 2 days. On the 3rd day, that wasn't permitted anymore. On the 3rd day, they, you know, the great big notices went up, and it wasn't forbidden to enter shops and forbidden for the forced labourers to enter houses. That's when I went to look for shoes.
At the liberation, people came along this road and then into town.
Do
you remember that?
Yes, of course I do. Oh,
and what was the atmosphere as you kind of came along this road?
It was just euphoric. I mean, I don't know where we found the strength from, because I mean, I was on my last lap. I mean, that's absolutely true. I weighed 5 stone.
The 2 days of looting by the other liberated prisoners meant there was little left in the town for the starving women from Kitty's camp.
Don't forget, we went on a path of destruction. Do you know what we did in some of the houses? We opened up the taps and flooded the place. We tipped all the drawers out and set fire to the interior.
Hardly adequate payback for over 2 years of captivity, yet on April the 14th, 1945, perhaps immaterial. The death march was at last over. Angered by what they found, like these whips used by the SS on inmates, the American liberators burnt down the lice-infested camp. They moved the women into the relative luxury of a nearby Luftwaffe airbase. Here the starving women were treated as human beings, were entertained by the infantry band, and kitchens were set up to feed them.
Everybody had to eat 5 eggs for breakfast, did you know? That's right, and we're standing there saying, eat it up, eat it up.
Buildings like this you were put in, were you?
Buildings like, oh, look at this. You see this? No, I'll tell you what, that's it. That was the entrance into the kitchen, but you can't see it now. It's been,
here?
That's right, it's been bricked up. And there were some banisters on both sides, and you see this ramp? Well, the Yanks, the Americans, used to go up and down on the motorcycles.
See where the banisters were?
There they were, I was right, there's the banisters here. Concrete banisters, by the way, and they used to ride down the concrete banisters. Not just on the ramp, but on the banister.
Were you
were
living
on
in
pillion.
these buildings?
Well, that was a kitchen block, but yes, we were living on all these buildings, that's right. They were all converted into living quarters. And they renamed it Camp Vassar. Vassar was a very famous American school in the States somewhere, so they named this after the school.
And how long were you here for?
Well, I was here probably a month, 6 weeks, something like that.
This is the place where liberation really became a reality for you.
That's right, that's right. Well, The big thing was seeing the actual camp being burnt down. There was a big ceremony, and we all watched the thing going up in smoke. That was a great thing. That's the biggest thing. Let's just see the destruction of the camp. And this was a new chapter.
We set out with certain ideas about covering your death march and final 6 months. What do we want people to learn, and do you think we've achieved that?
I'm sure we've achieved that because a lot of people couldn't understand what happened the last 6 months of the war. When people were evacuated and the chaos, and that people were shunted from place to place, and trains were going all over the place, and death marches were all over. That hasn't actually been documented properly, and that's been a good thing to do.
How do you account for your survival, though?
Well, we knew how to fight for our food, we knew how to fight for somewhere to sleep, and a lot of people didn't know. They didn't know how to handle the situation.
Has it been a valuable journey?
Oh, it's been invaluable. I think so. I've always wanted to do it, and I've learned so much myself, especially this business of why was I transported all that way? Why did the armaments minister pick out this group of women to be transferred from 1,000 miles? But he didn't worry about how they were going to get there.
What do you think has been most valuable about this journey for you, Kitty?
57 years can go by, but your memory will not fade. Certain events, if they are extraordinary, you'll never forget them. They're kind of etched in your brain, and they stay with you for the rest of your days.